Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, pianist, composer, educator, broadcaster, and NEA jazz master. Ramsey Lewis was in New York City and he took part of this year's 2012 NEA Jazz Master induction ceremonies, as well as the concert, as well as performed a couple of dates at the famed B.B. King's here in Midtown New York. He has a brand new record in which he goes back to his electric roots from the 1970s, and he revisited one of the most pivotal records of his career, Sun Goddess. And that record was released in 1974, and it reunited him and former drummer of the Ramsey Lewis Trio, Mr. Maurice White, who's the founder of Earth, Wind & Fire. It also reunited him with one of his dear friends, the late Charles Stepney, who was a dynamic producer and arranger for Chess Records, as well as Earth, Wind & Fire and some of Ramsey's records. Tonight we're going to sit down and analyze the electric period in Ramsey's life. We're going to talk about the importance of Sun Goddess, as well as talk about his role and how important the NEA Jazz Masters is in preserving jazz and the legacy of this music, as well as reflect and talk about his dear friend and mentor, the late Dr. Billy Taylor. Congratulations on this brand new CD. You're pretty much at a new chapter now. You're on a new label now, and you decided to go back and revisit a very important part of your musical career.
Well, I figured, first of all, thanks for the congratulations. I figured since I brought the electric band back together, well, not really brought them back together because everybody's new except Henry Johnson, that I would take a look at that music that I was playing when I did have an electric band. So our first rehearsal, we needed something to rehearse. So I said, well, let's take a look at those songs and let's rehearse on them. And they went so well, and the young guys on bass, Joshua Ramos, he's 28, 29. On drums, Charles Rick Heath, he's 33 or 34. And on the album, it's Mike Logan on keyboards, but touring with us is Tim Gant. But those songs went so well, I said, you guys are bringing new blood, new energy, new ideas to these songs. So I'm going to put them out there. So that's how those songs ended up on the album. When they asked me, what are you going to record? I said, well, I'll write new songs. I did write a couple new songs for this album, but I'll write new songs for our next album. Right now, we're going to just play the songs we've been jamming on.
This record, Sun Goddess, was at a very pivotal part of your career, and the music was changing at the time during the early 70s. Fusion was going real strong, and FM radio had become a real important key to selling records and radio airplay. Where were you musically right now? Because you were also in transition.
Where was I musically in the 70s? Yes. Well, the early part of the 70s, I was still a trio. Maurice White on drums, and Cleveland Eaton on bass, and I was happy as a trio. And I was in Washington, D.C. one year, I think it was 73, 74, 74, for one day. It was during a record session. We had started recording an album which hadn't a name yet, and it was going to be, by and large, an acoustic album, except I was going to use electric piano, Fender Rhodes piano, on a couple of the songs. We had to break the session for a day or two to go to Washington to play a gig. And while I was in Washington, I got a call from Maurice White, and he said, "Ramsey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm playing a gig tonight, but I'm going right back to Chicago because we got to finish an album." He said, "Oh, you're doing an album?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I got a tune for you." And he said, "In fact, we're going to go to L.A. after New York. You want us to stop, some of us to stop in Chicago and help you out with the tune. We'd be glad to do it." You know, I'm like, right. By now, of course, he has left the trio, and he's formed Earth, Wind, and Fire, and they're sky high. You know, they're so popular. So I said, "Please do that." And we did. We spent a few days on a song called Hot Dog It. And he said, "That's your hit." And before he left, he said, "Oh, there's this melody that we're going to do that you could do if you want. Very simple. Most of it's going to be blowing, soloing. But we can put some words to it, put some voices on it." Long story short, we did this piece, and I said, "What are you going to call that?" And he said, "Sun Goddess." Well, I had no idea that piece was going to take off. We liked the name of it, and so we named the album Sun Goddess. So we put out, the first single was Hot Dog It, and we thought that was going to be the big one. But people started, and the radio stopped playing Hot Dog It after 2-3 weeks. But the album was running out of stores, and we were trying to figure out, well, what's going on? So they were coming asking for that album. So the album became so big, and the two tunes that we used, not only electric instruments but voices on, were so popular that in 1974-75 is when I said, well, to play the songs from that album, I got to take the Fender Rhodes. I got to take some keyboards, some electronic keyboards, and that started my life as playing electric instruments. However, I couldn't manage playing the Steinway and the keyboards on top of the Steinway, so I said, I'm going to hire a keyboard player to travel with me, and I need a guitar player to play the intro to Sun Goddess. I might as well get somebody that can really solo too. So that's how the electric band got started, and that went on for almost 10 years. And I don't know what happened after that. One guy had to leave for this, one guy had to leave for that, and I ended up being a trio again, and started playing duo dates with Billy Taylor. And played, so we tried, besides being a trio, we were playing duos. But during those days, I really had fun interacting with the electric band, as I am now.
Another important part of that record was another friend of yours from your Chess Records days, a man by the name of Mr. Charles Stepney. And he's the one that kind of helped along with Maurice, kind of craft the sound of that record?
Charles Stepney had been invaluable in my career, period, even before that album, because in all, Charles might have produced 4 or 5 of my albums, including, no, maybe 5 or 6, 7 of my albums, including Sun Goddess. But Charles was also instrumental in, as you say, working with Maurice, honing the Earth, Wind, and Fire song. Now, Earth, Wind, and Fire sound. You must remember, some people don't realize that Maurice was living in Chicago at the time. He wasn't born in Chicago, but he lived in Chicago almost all his life. And Charles Stepney is from Chicago, and all 3 of us lived on the South Side. So we knew each other, and Stepney was very close to Maurice White. And because Maurice was the staff drummer on Chess Producing, Charles Stepney was the staff producer, and I was one of the artists on the label, so we saw each other a lot. And what was unique about Stepney, unfortunately, he passed on in his late 40s, which now has been about 30 years ago, probably, maybe 20 years ago. But anyway, what was unique about Charles Stepney was he was as astute in jazz as he was in R&B, as he was in pop, as he was in rock, as he was in classical music. I mean, here's a man that was exposed and learned all the rudiments and functionings of all these various musics. And so he could bring all that to play, or he could lean a little bit this way or lean a little bit that way. And being that unique, he was invaluable to me and to Maurice White and other artists, Minnie Riperton, the Rotary Connection, the list goes on.
He produced that Electric Mud record by, was it Muddy Waters?
Muddy Waters, right. Muddy Waters, and he did something for Howlin' Wolf, too.
You know, it's important because this record, I think, really was like in that vein, like Herbie Hancock, who was another contemporary of yours, Headhunters. I mean, it was a time where your music crossed over just not on R&B radio, but pop radio also.
Yeah, I think Herbie was a little ahead of me as far as going into electric music. But Herbie being from Chicago and exposed to all kinds of music, we all, what's unique about Chicago is there's no pressure to be anything but who you are and what you are. There's no pressure to be more hip or less hip or too hip or less funky or more funky, whatever it is. The people in the Midwest, especially Chicago, said, well, just show me what you got. So it's a wonderful city to be in if you're an artist, and not only a jazz performer, but in any part of the performing arts. Chicago is wonderful. That's why I won't move away from there.
Chicago's been good because of Chess Records. I mean, and you had a wonderful opportunity to work with some of your other contemporaries. Ahmad Jamal was on the label. I mean, there were Bunky Green. There was a lot of great jazz and also soul and blues that came out of that.
Yeah, the Chess Brothers actually was in the stationery business, and they wanted to expand and do something else, and they got in contact with, I don't know who introduced them to Gene Ammons, and they put out a single called Pennies from Heaven. And Gene Ammons played it as a ballad, and it really, really took off, and they were like, oh, so blues, which they were already in, Muddy Waters, etc., is great, but maybe we can do something with jazz. And they kind of did a couple other artists before they did Ahmad Jamal at the Pershing, and that blew up. I mean, it was like a pop record, and that's when the Chess Brothers said, okay, not only blues, but we're going to do this thing in jazz. And that's when they got in touch with me and others. Sonny Stitt did something there, and others, Clark Terry. I mean, the list goes on.
You are an NEA inducted Jazz Master, and this week you took part of this year's celebrations. In fact, two native Chicagoans were inducted this year, Von Freeman as well as Jack DeJohnette. What is it about the NEA Jazz Masters that continues to keep this legacy alive, and how important are they right now to the music?
Well, the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters program is important to jazz because it supports what we all feel about this music. Jazz is the only cultural I can't think of the word I'm trying to think, is the only cultural contribution to world culture as an original art form. And it has had its problems being recognized as such. Until the National Endowment for the Arts came along and started this program. And this program is America's Pulitzer Prize. It's like saying this is very special, and as a country and as a government, and as part of the National Endowment for the Arts, which speaks to classical music, opera, our Broadway, which speaks to everything, also jazz, and to, along the way, take 4, 5, 6, 7 jazz artists every year for the past several years and say, you deserve this, is a big deal. It's not just the money that goes along with it. It's not just the plaque or the honorarium that goes along with it. It's the recognition. It's saying, job well done, we're proud of you.
Another person who means a great deal to you as well as me and a lot of musicians and journalists is Dr. Billy Taylor, God rest his soul. And last year, it was 2 years ago about this time, we were at Riverside Church and you gave a dynamic speech on his legacy. And the direction of jazz music right now needs a couple of things, in my opinion. It needs the visual and the communicator to get the message out like what you're doing right now, but it's also needing a couple of nurturers, which Dr. Taylor was to you and to many, many musicians. What's the next phase of jazz music, and where are we going to have to do to nurture more Dr. Taylors now?
Well, Dr. Billy Taylor and those like him come along rarely. It'll be some time before we get another Dr. Billy Taylor. He was very important to me in every way, not only in my music, my piano playing, my ideas about music, but also when I struck out on radio, he was there saying, well, you might want to think about this, or da da da, and I had questions about television. Billy, what about this? They want me to do this, that, and the other, And he was always there, and he was like a big brother to me, about life, and there wasn't one thing that we couldn't talk to him about, that I couldn't talk to him about, that he didn't have something wise to say. And sometimes the wisest thing he said to me was, "Be yourself, whatever you feel." So he's just a great guy. But in terms of this music, I think we have to look deeper into our political, social system here in these United States. I think that Dr. Billy Taylor came from an era when African Americans were privileged to go to schools. I don't know what grammar school Billy Taylor went to, but in general, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, those young people who made their mark in jazz, gospel, etc., came from the public school system. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of schools, millions of kids, especially inner city kids. If you go back in history, you'll see that many of the contributors to this art form came through the public school system. And you say, well, how is that? Because nowadays, all the schools don't have music. They don't have arts, the arts. And that's true. But during that time that I was coming up, and I went to a public school in the inner city, we not only had a symphony orchestra, we had a concert band, a dance band, we had ballet, modern dance, we had industrial arts, we had fine arts. Once a year, the students put on a musical, and the fine arts people drew the scenery, and the industrial arts guys and girls built the scenery, and these kids came together and put on the show. And this went on until, and I don't know if there's any racism involved in this at all, but in the 60s, when the riots came about, and there was this mad dash for the suburbs, and it left Latinos and blacks in the inner cities, all of a sudden now the public school systems were costing too much money. And well, we're going to they cut physical education, they cut music, we don't need music, and nowadays even they're talking about cutting the teaching force. And it wasn't that way back in the day. So the social culture of our country and the political culture of our country, we have to take a hard look at that. And I don't know if we're willing to do it. Sometimes we're blindsided by other issues and we think they're important. But to me, education is the key. To me, young black kids, young Latino kids, it's all about getting a good education in whatever your field. And find a way to do it. If you're in a school system that's saying we're going to cut the teaching staff, we're cutting out music, we're cutting this, we're cutting that, I don't know if you should move. I don't know if you're in a position to take private lessons. I don't know what you can do, but fight for your right to develop as a youngster, and get your parents, get the churches, just speak up, because that's the only way we're going to change this. I mean, we're losing our position in so many areas. We're going through a political campaign right now, and they talk about so many different things. And a lot of them are big, broad strokes that cause people to forget about the really, really, really important things. And to me, when they talk about the future of the Republican Party, the future of the Democratic Party, what about the future of our young people? What about the future of their minds? What contribution can these young people make to our country 10 years from now, 5 years from now, if we don't nurture and help them develop what they're all about? So, jazz is what I do, but I try to look at our country in the broadest strokes And we as a people need to rise up, not necessarily physically, but definitely in terms of what we think and what we feel about our communities, and band together and fight for what's right. And what could be more right than our young people's minds?
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'd like to personally thank Mr. Ramsey Lewis for his time, as well as the staff and management here at BB King's. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Until next time, peace.